Hey, welcome to this Green Screen International lecture. This lecture is part of Green Education in Media Erasmus Plus project, and my name is Kirsi Karimäki.
And my name is Tuomo Joronen. Welcome.
And we are both from Tampere University of Applied Sciences. And in this slide, you can see the partners of the project, their logos.
Yes, GEM project is led by Film University Babelsberg Konrad Wolf and by talented Björn Stockleben and naturally by talented Sophie there as well. And we have 7 countries and the countries were already presented in the previous slide, but the universities are from Germany, Greece, Finland, Croatia, Malta, and Poland. And the topics are about environmental awareness, supporting digital and green capabilities, and new sustainable curricula and courses in the end.
And here you can see our work packages. In work package 2, we research alternative media learning spaces. And we want to know how can we embrace nature as a context of learning. In work package 3, we want to study environmental impact of media design and production. And we want to know how can we make our own production processes sustainable. And for instance, this webinar where you participate now is one example of activities in work package 3. In work package 4, we develop stories of environmental impact and climate change. And we also want to know how can we, with these stories, for instance, contribute and make a difference to society and make it more sustainable. And then in the end, in work package 5, we concentrate on building an environmental media curriculum and put the findings on practice in the partner universities.
And today we are happy to introduce to you Dr. Emīlija Veselova. She is one of our alumni, so she's one of our bright minds, young bright minds coming from our university as well, but she's an expert in emerging area of designing with nature, also known as more than human multi-species planet-centric design. So Emīlija has done her doctoral degree in the design from Aalto University.
Yeah, and today in her lecture, she talks about what is sustainability from sustainability sciences point of view, and how to include nature as a participant in creative processes and reasons why to do it. And then also she covers how to include nature to the projects. And then in the end, we have some time for the discussion. So think about your questions and be prepared to be active yourself in the end part as well. But now I think it's time to give a microphone to Emīlija.
Hi, everyone. And hi, Kirsi and Tuomo. Thank you for inviting me to this event. As I was introduced, my name is Emīlija, and I have my bachelor's degree from the Interactive Media program in Tampere, University of Applied Sciences. And then I continued my studies in design. I did my master's at Aalto University, also in Finland. And then also there I did my doctoral studies and defended my dissertation on this very topic last year. So I'm curious and keen also to hear after the lecture your questions, but also your perspectives on how this relates to what you all are doing. And there will be 3 parts to my lecture. So we'll start by defining sustainability. And then the second topic will look again from sustainability science point of view, the worldviews that underlie the sustainability crisis. And then we'll conclude with then how does all of that feed into including natural stakeholders in design and creative processes. And I'll also show some concrete examples of how that can be done. And let's start with sustainability. But before I dive into it, I'll ask you for 1 minute for yourself. You can take some notes, but we won't share it unless you want to share it at the end of the lecture. So for 1 minute, think for yourself, what is sustainability? And do you recall any sustainability definitions or models that you know? So what is sustainability? It's a term that can mean many things and people use it very differently. On the one hand, it is a term that we can use to describe our ability of humanity to keep living on this planet, and our survival is endangered by climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and then many other crises that are coming out of that. But sustainability is also used to refer to this aim of finding solutions of how can we live now on this changed planet without compromising the ability of our future generations of humans to live here as well. So it's about our long-term, but now it is also in a way about mid-term survival of the human race here. And when I mention sustainability science, it's as most of you probably know, it's kind of a research area or a direction that is transdisciplinary. It includes many disciplines, and it primarily looks into defining what is sustainability, kind of what are our goals, what is the current situation, where are we now, what are the indicators, and then also how do we move from where we are now, how do we achieve sustainability, how do we imagine it, but also how do we transition towards it. And in sustainability science, one of the key things that I have found useful are sustainability models. So it's a theoretical models of how we can understand sustainability, how we can visualize and think about it and conceptualize what it even is. And today we'll cover 3. So we'll talk about weak, strong, and multi-species sustainability. And let's start with the weak sustainability model. And I assume that many or most of you have seen this model. It's been around for decades. It is these 3 bubbles where there's economy, society, natural environment. But sustainability scientists are not actually very keen or excited or they don't really support this model because in its essence, it wrongly suggests that we can have parts of economy that are sustainable without the society, that we have parts of society that can be sustainable without the natural environment. So I strongly recommend of kind of not using this model, and instead sustainability science, they more use the strong sustainability model, or they're also called the nested sustainability model, where the economy is within or nested within the society, and then this economy and society are nested within the natural environment. And when they're nested within something, it means that it is dependent on. So what do I mean by that? If we do not have society, if we do not have humans, we do not have economy on this planet. There isn't an economy that exists without society, without humans, without us having the economic activity. Similarly, if there isn't natural environment, we as humans can't exist, even though we might think otherwise at kind of the basic physiological level. We are beings who need clean water, we need food, we need oxygen, or we need appropriate air to breathe. And all of those things we receive from the natural environment. It sustains us. At the same time, also all of our materials, even though we call some materials artificial, like plastics, but they still come from the natural environment. So if we do not have a functioning environment, we physiologically as beings cannot continue living. And also our society and economy cannot continue properly functioning as well. So that's why these strong or nested sustainability models, they very much highlight this dependence of economy on society and of society on an economy on natural environment. And then a few years ago, even further elaboration of kind of what is sustainability came out, called multi-species sustainability concept. It's similar to the previous one, but it has some key differences that we haven't really talked about before, or it wasn't as prominent at these discussions. So this concept very much highlights that human needs and also the future generations are interdependent with the non-humans, with the natural environment and their future generations. So to have future generations of humans, we need future generations of nature's species, organisms. We need the future of the natural world. And it also recognizes that the flourishing and well-being of other species is necessary for flourishing well-being and survival of humans. So this very much puts the emphasis from the discussion in sustainability from talking about humans and human survival and human need to exist to also saying, no, we are interdependent with the natural world. We also need them to flourish, exist, and be well. And furthermore, in this graph, it also breaks down this natural environment that can be very vague and sometimes kind of hard to grasp what it is. But they further break down that when we talk about the natural environment, we talk about animals, plants, but also about microbial societies like microbes and fungi and things like that. Also the biosphere, so the whole living sphere on this planet, and the hydrosphere, atmosphere, and the geosphere. So we need all of those things, kind of what is on the outside or the outer skirts of this graph. We need that for the things inside to exist. And these models are, as I said, quite well, they showcase what is dependent on what, or especially highlight that we as humans are dependent on the natural environment. But as a designer, I find them a little bit hard to work with, because at the same time, when I sit here in my room or I work on a project, the world doesn't look that neat in these little neat bubbles. That, well, here's the environment, here's the economy, here's the humans. Great, now I work in these bubbles. The world is a lot more complex, it's interconnected. So I also very much like and find useful the concept of socio-ecological systems. So what are socio-ecological systems? So we can view, or scientists view, this world as an entanglement, a mesh of different entities, processes, cycles, etc. There's economic entities like money or the banking system, societal entities like us humans, but also our groups, policy, institutions, and all sorts of things that we as humans create. There's environmental entities that are like plants, species, etc., or the different spheres that I showed in the previous graph, and we'll also return a bit further down the line to who are these environmental entities. And then there's also technological entities, like the physical entities, like the table, the roads, the buildings, but also the digital infrastructure, like the internet, and the mixed infrastructure where we have, for example, a mobile phone that is physical, but then also has digital components to it. So we live within these socio-ecological systems. And sometimes we forget maybe the ecological or the natural and environmental entities within them, but we need to recognize that this is what we live within, and that we need to consider all types of elements, including the natural elements and also the whole system. And why the whole system? Because sustainability is a property of a system. In its essence, sustainability is about a system being able to continue existing while also shifting and changing and maybe experiencing crises, but it continues to exist. If we have a cup, we can't say that it is sustainable because it is not a system. It exists within a system, but we don't really know how it interacts with the things around it, what it is life cycle, how it interacts during the whole life with the elements around it, or how long is it even used, or is it bought and then placed in a cupboard and not touched for 50 years. So when we talk about sustainability and want to work with sustainability, it's essential to think about systems, and in particular about socio-ecological systems and entanglements. And that means that also the projects that we work in, they are embedded within, or they exist within the socio-ecological systems. There aren't projects that are just some bubble that doesn't interact with anything around it, or is not connected to anything. And these connections can be different. It can be nutrients, or it can be oxygen. Even by speaking here right now, I can connect with the systems around me through the oxygen that I breathe in and the CO2 that I breathe out. But it can be also material flows, or electrical energy, or data, but also experiences, emotions that connect us to things around them. And it's impossible to fully understand how we are connected to everything around us, or how projects are connected to everything, kind of the social ecological systems. But we can start untangling that. And I think in design schools, and my education in design is linked to, for example, service design or design for government, more on the service and complex systems level, but I think this would also apply to the product design or graphic design and things like that. Where we have a project and the context, and in design, I think we've kind of more or less have started to be able to identify and train our students and also ourselves, identify, okay, where does the money come from? What, I don't know, blockchain technology do we need to sustain this? Who are our users or citizens in this city that we need to talk to? What technology do we need to use? How do we connect to these things? How we're gonna use them in our project? And then sometimes we can even further identify people or groups or some policy that we need to consider that impacts how we're going to do this. But we are much rarer taught, or if ever, not in many places, how to identify what are the natural stakeholders that connect to our project, what are the direct interrelations, but then also what are the secondary natural stakeholders that impact what we shape and how we design. And I'm not saying that now in every project you need to start identifying every single natural stakeholder 3 steps away that this project has, but just visualizing that for yourself, that, okay, this project is within the socio-ecological systems. How do I connect with them? And how can I not leave the ecological or the natural elements out? And so from sustainability perspective, the 2 things that are very important to remember is that humans, our society, technology, economy, practices, it depends on nature, and that we also are inseparably interconnected with nature, natural beings, and systems. It comes from these nested sustainability models and then the socio-ecological systems. So that's something that we very much, or what sustainability science informs us or tells us that I think we can learn for design what we need to do, but also for us as regular citizens. Then let's give a moment to digest for that. And then the next topic would be the worldviews that underlie the sustainability crisis. So we have things happening we might know where we are heading, where we want to go, but then how do the worldviews, or why am I even talking about them? So again, I would ask you for about 1 minute, if you can think for yourself. So what is human or a human? What is nature? And then what should be the relationship between the two? Maybe let's start with, why am I even talking about, or why it's important to talk about mindsets and worldviews? In sustainability science, kind of part of the research also looks into what are the root causes, or some of the root causes that we could identify and address that have led to the sustainability crisis. And mindsets or worldviews are seen as some of those. So one of the root causes could be seen as that we as humans, we focus on our wants, our own wants and needs, while disregarding most, if not all, needs of the nature. And at the same time, how we act in this world largely depends on how we perceive the world, knowingly or unknowingly, if we are aware of that or not, how we see how we should act in the world. Informs how we act within it. And with this idea that we humans focus on our own needs, of course, we need to survive, we need to live, we have goals. We are as species, also as biological beings here, but it's something that we can start thinking about, that, okay, if that is the potential root cause of the sustainability crisis, then what are the elements of it, and how can we talk about these things? So today, I want to talk about two key types of mindsets or worldviews. And the first one would be the belief that humans are separate from nature. And then the other one would be the belief that humans have the right to dominate nature. And also in line with that, anthropocentrism, or the belief that humans are valuable above everything else. And let's start with the separation from nature. So it is a Western perspective, and it's in many or most Western languages. I think that humans and nature are defined as in contrast with each other. Even if I look to the dictionary, nature is defined as yada, 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 as opposed to humans and human creations. So we often talk about, this is humans, this is nature, this is society, this is nature, culture, nature. And there is this divide of who we are as humans, and we are not nature. And it's not a new concept. It's not something that we have come up in the past 10 or 20 years. It's been around for thousands of years. It's this view that humans strive to be independent from nature. And it's ingrained in our language, culture, worldviews, attitudes, different practices. It's a subconscious thing or essence in which we operate within, and we rarely question this divide. It's quite challenging to dig into subconscious meanings of these, or find words of how to explain that. So, and maybe for me, the socio-ecological systems has been one of the ways how to question this divide. But it doesn't mean that I, after 7 years of working on this, have even done kind of massive work on unpacking what does this mean for me, because I and we all still exist in this Western culture. So in this lecture, when I talk about humans and nature, I still retain this division, but I strive to make it visible and kind of reflect on it through the interconnections and interrelations that we have. But this idea or belief that humans are separate from nature is something that we should keep in mind, and when we can work towards thinking or pondering upon, but it's not something that I believe we could address within a short period of time. And then the next part would be the belief that the humans have the right to dominate nature. And it's the belief that humans are superior to nature, that we have the right to dominate nature, that we can use it as we please. And it's linked to various, again, historical developments in Western societies. In the Judeo-Christian religions, God gave nature to humans to sustain themselves. In Greek mythology, it was a big theme of kind of conquering nature, or like getting the fire, conquering fire. So again, it's not a new belief. It is ingrained in the things that we do and how we have been doing things, and now we're arrived at a place where we see some consequences, or many consequences of this approach. So we can start to rethinking, is that so? And there are also different views. So as a person, for example, I might believe that I very much value nature, that I am part of nature, or I cooperate and co-create with nature. So there is a whole spectrum of other perspectives of how we could view the relationship with nature. But an important thing to also note is that often the personal view of a person on their relationship with nature, how they value nature, how they regard it, what they want to do with it, is not the same as their professional view. So in our professions, in our practice, we are often trained of how our profession or practice treats nature, how we relate to it, what is right or wrong. Do we talk about nature at all? We might at all kind of not see it and avoid it, that it's not a topic that we cover, or if some of you might be engineers, is that, well, we are stewards of nature, that's why we need to build these dams here and there. So it's important also kind of recognize the distinction between what we personally view, and then also what does our profession, our practice tells us of how we should relate to nature. And here is also the word anthropocentrism comes in, and it's a term that is often used nowadays. If I have read quite many people strive to do non-anthropocentric design, or ecocentric design, or planet-centric design. So that's why I wanted to include here as a kind of a reference point for reflection. But in essence, the term anthropocentrism comes from Western environmental ethics, or from Western philosophy, and it looks into, in essence, are we more responsible for our actions towards nature? So in anthropocentrism, it would view that we are morally responsible only towards humans, and there's, if anything, out there that we natural entities that are intrinsically valuable, or they have a value in itself, we should value just for the sake that they exist. If we have to choose between valuing natural entities and humans still should be valued more highly and should be prioritized in moral decision-making. And then in non-anthropocentrism, there are also ideas, and there's quite varied ideas, that we are morally responsible towards some parts of nature. Some parts of nature are intrinsically valuable, and we should see them as equals in our moral deliberations, or deciding what are good or bad acts towards it. So if some of you are interested in that, reading through these ethical perspectives can be quite eye-opening, but then also at the same time, there's still thinking frameworks of how do we relate to nature? Do we have the right to dominate nature as we please, to do whatever we please with it? So how should we treat it? And with that, I think I'll summarize the notions about sustainability that I wanted to cover today here. Is that the first one is that sustainability is about human survival on the earth, and then that humans depend on nature. We depend on it for oxygen, for breathing, for materials, for climate or appropriate temperatures to live within. Humans and also all our creations, our projects, are very interconnected with nature. We live and design within socio-ecological systems, even though sometimes we don't really want to see the ecological part of those systems. And then worldviews that humans are separate from nature and can dominate nature or use it as we please are seen as some of the root causes of the sustainability crisis, which kind of, they contradict directly of what we learn from sustainability about humans' nature and human nature interconnection and human nature interdependence. So with these, we get to maybe the part that some of you might be looking forward to the most. but I want to talk about including natural stakeholders in design and creative processes. And again, one last time, if you could think for yourself for 1 minute of, based on what you have heard so far today, why should we consider natural stakeholders in design and creative processes? And I think this question that I asked you was also one of the key questions that I had for my doctoral research of why should we, or maybe we shouldn't, include natural stakeholders in our processes. Where I arrived after 6 years of research is that I think that we need to consider, and by consider, I also mean include, represent, design for non-human stakeholders in design processes. And I identified 3 reasons for doing that. So the first one was that we should include and consider natural non-human stakeholders to design practical solutions aligned with systemic and multi-species sustainability and socio-ecological systems. So even at the smaller steps of including natural stakeholders, I believe that including them, representing them, showing that they also are present in the processes, we can start developing solutions. And by solutions, I mean mostly products or services or urban settings where we align these things more with the kind of the reality of socio-ecological systems in which we live. So we start shifting from only designing for the human needs, or even maybe needs of the economy or needs of the technology, towards designing for the needs or the complexity and the interconnections within the socio-ecological systems. The second reason why we should be doing that is that we can start challenging and potentially shifting the worldviews and mindsets underlying the sustainability crisis. So, for example, in collaborative design, one of the things that we do is we invite different stakeholders to sit around the same table and explore the design problem or design the solution. And often it's only the human stakeholders that are there. They represent their organizations or their personal perspectives, their views, their needs. And I believe that if the non-humans are not added to the table, we can kind of disregard them and really focus on the human elements within the project. But then if we start including or representing the stakeholders that are in this space, showcasing which stakeholders do we have, or having people come in and speak and represent these natural stakeholders, we can start challenging, well, first of all, ourselves as designers that, okay, we are interconnected with nature. Maybe it's not that we can do whatever we want with it, and we can start really kind of reflecting on our own activities, but then also working on the worldviews and mindsets of the people that we work with. And it doesn't mean that we will be able to, through one workshop or even a one-year project, I don't think, change entirely their worldviews and mindsets about the separation from nature or dominance over nature. But we can start challenging those and seeing if there's minor changes, then we can start making. And I think this reason could also be one linked to the process, but also to the outcomes. So what are the stories that we tell? How do we present our project? What are the final outcomes, or how the narratives around nature are told in games or movies or any other audiovisual media, so that also those elements can start challenging the worldviews and mindsets of the people who watch them. Then the last element, I think, is that once we start including and considering non-humans in our non-humans in our processes, we create opportunities to illuminate and challenge structures and systems that maintain and sustainability. And by structures and systems, I mean policy, regulation, but also practices within or social practices, our habits, how we teach, and our theory, for example, in design, or theory in media, or theory in art, how we teach those things. So the education systems, etc. So once we start working with the stakeholders, or with the natural stakeholders, we can see how when we include them, what do we hit against? What are the challenges? What are the contradictions? For example, is there contradiction in law that we cannot do something? Or is there contradiction of how we have been taught how we need to do our work, or we as educators, how we need to teach our students? And of course, these three reasons, they don't exist in isolation from each other. So in my work, I use this kind of, again, a nested view on it, based also on the 3 spheres of transformation in sustainability, where we have the practical solutions on the inside. Those practical solutions are shaped by the structural elements, so the systems and structures, and then all of that is shaped by the personal, but also collective beliefs, values, and worldviews. So when we include the natural stakeholders, it doesn't mean that we always have all 3 goals in mind. We might have a primary goal in one of them, for example, working on the individual or collective beliefs. But once we start working with that, we can also see challenges, or maybe propose or kind of nudge change in the structural or practical levels. So this is where I arrived with my looking into already why people include natural stakeholders, and also how this idea or proposal of including natural stakeholders correlates with sustainability science. But before I go into showing the examples, I do want to highlight that sustainability-related reasons are not the only reasons why some designers or creative practitioners include and consider natural stakeholders. There are also many designers that include natural non-humans to support their well-being. So, for example, well-being of working animals, zoo animals, pets. So often those projects don't really have an explicit sustainability agenda. Maybe in some ways I could attribute them to the personal sphere of transformation. But when looking into these also examples that I show soon, some of them are created to support the well-being of the animals, rather than explicitly to strive for sustainability. So I've been talking a lot about natural stakeholders or non-human entities, etc. But who and what are they? In my work, because I was heavily working with socio-ecological systems and systems thinking, I also strive to develop a systemic typology, or kind of a tool that could help me see the variations. So I'll present 7 types. I don't claim that they are the only types that are out there, but this is what I found in one of my research projects. So we'll start with single organisms, and it's quite a typical stakeholder for those who work with natural non-humans. So it's kind of an organism that is typically, or in biology, it's seen an independent living being. So it could be plants, but it could also be different types of animals like mammals, birds, reptilians, etc. So considering them, or a single organism, is an option. Then we can also talk about single species collectives. So it's kind of a collective or a group of organisms from the same species that have a kind of a special organization of life. They need each other to live. One of the examples here on the left, it's a hornworth. It's not a plant, but it's kind of a adjacent, plant adjacent, Hornworth, and these are the different organisms or several organisms together, but they stick together and form this colony to live. Similarly, in insect world, it's bees or the social insect colonies. A single bee cannot survive or live in this world. They need their beehive. They have a specific organization of life within that beehive, and we need to ensure that when we design for bees, we design for colonies or species collectives. Also algae and fungi, where we can't really separate a fungi, kind of where is the one organism that ends, and maybe it's not even a collection really of organisms, is an entity. I view it as a single species collective. Then we also have multi-species collectives, and it's where there are several types of species. For example, the lichens here on the tree trunk, the gray things. It is collective. It's microorganisms. It's I think it's algae and bacteria together. So they jointly form symbiosis and then live together, but it's two different species. Also soil, I think, could be seen as a multi-species collective. There's a lot of different organisms living there, and it's kind of a living, breathing being of many different types of living organisms together. Of course, also living systems or ecosystems, depending on how much we zoom in or zoom out. It's a location-tied system of living organisms like a garden or a forest or a river. And as we shift how far we zoom in or zoom out, we might see a different ecosystem or living system. Then, if we talk about systemic view on stakeholders that we should consider, we should also consider life processes, or the processes of how different elements flow between the living and non-living parts of the biosphere, such as the photosynthesis process or the decomposition of organic matter, which is here in the image to the right, or respiration or breathing, or nitrogen fixation, which is a process on the roots of a tree that involves the tree, but then also the bacteria and fungi in the soil and how they exchange nitrogen. And why I promote considering the life processes in our work is that because I think sometimes they can be very much overlooked, even though we are seeking to find sustainable solution. For example, with the decomposition of organic matter, I often get surprised or maybe frustrated when people take, for example, butterfly wings or rose petals and then coat them in plastic. And then they say that they have created a kind of a upcycled or created a waste-free product. But at the same time, what they have done, in my eyes, they have prevented the process or disrupted the possibility of the decomposition of organic matter to happen. So we have coated the petal into plastic. We cannot, the petal cannot decompose anymore. So the elements within it, like the carbon, phosphor, nitrogen, and other things that are within it, they cannot break down and cannot be taken back into the ecosystem because now it is coated with plastic. So I would be curious to explore also further how these life processes happen and how do we in our design projects impact them. If we talk about life processes, we also need to talk about the biogeochemical cycles. So how do these elements like carbon flow throughout the atmosphere? The carbon cycle, also nitrogen, phosphorus, water, a lot of these things flow in the biosphere. And we need that flow. For life to continue living, we need, for example, the rose petal or fallen leaves, we need them to break down so that they become part of soil, so that they can again next year grow. The tree can use the nutrients from it to grow the trees, and then it falls again. So there is this cycle if we wouldn't have the biogeochemical cycles, but also the life processes. For example, we would just have a bunch of leaves laying around that nothing happens to. So these are also processes that we can consider. And another process is the processes of the atmosphere. So the weather, season, climate, how those impact us. Because, for example, if we talk about design of transportation services, we would definitely here in Finland consider how the winter season will impact what we are designing, but then also kind of in the longer term thinking, if we're doing any visioning projects, then we need to consider climate and how it will, changing climate will affect us, but also in the long run, how might we impact the climate, for example, with the CO2 emissions or any other emissions that our creation will produce. So there are the 7 types. But one thing that is important to remember that when we work within systemic view, that one observable entity is several systemic stakeholder types. And I'll walk you through that idea. So when we start thinking in systems, we start viewing the world of the picture that we see, that it's complex. We can break it down into different elements and see it as different stakeholders that are present simultaneously. So if we look at this tree, it's an organism, but it's also part of a living system, and we can't really pull that tree out. It's not just a floating object there. It's a part of the living system. It's part of the garden. But if we zoom in again, then we see that, oh, there are dots on the leaves, and these are bacterial disease, usually several types of bacteria together. So there is a multi-species collective on this tree. There is there are rotting cherries, so there's already decomposition of organic matter happening while the cherry is still attached to the tree. We have leaves that do photosynthesis, so there is life processes happening here. And then that also means that there is carbon cycle and oxygen cycle. We also have lichens on the tree, that is a multi-species collective. The roots of the tree are rooted within the soil, that is a multi-species collective, and also there's nitrogen fixation and nitrogen cycle happening as well. So that's what I mean, that yes, we have the typology and we have the different types, but when we engage with the environment around us, we need to start seeing it from kind of this complex view. And maybe we won't, maybe we'll just work with one of these stakeholder types, but it doesn't mean that if we identify one, that one is the single one that is there. So I come back to we talk about organisms, collectives, processes, systems, cycles, and then also the weather, climate, and season. But then let's arrive to the very end of our presentation, and then I'll show some of the ways how I've seen people include and represent the natural stakeholders, and also some concrete examples of the projects that are there. So we'll start with direct involvement. So in some of the types that I just showed, it is, for example, with pets or mammals, it's possible to directly involve the natural stakeholders into the process. So for example, them being engaged in prototype testing on development of interfaces that would work for dogs. Or also for working dogs. Here's a cancer detection dog that it is its job to sniff tissue, and then at a certain point when they detect cancer, press the machine in a particular way to indicate that there is cancer there. So this project looked into how does this mechanism work? How do we create this interface so it better aligns with the behavior of the dog than the behavior and needs of the human? And there is a full kind of direction in computer science called animal-computer interaction that does a lot of research into how animals can use the technology, or rather, how can we design and develop technology that is not designed for human use. Again, how that directly links to sustainability, I do not claim right away that it does, or I would want to see more investigation or discussion of that, but it is possible to include some mammals into direct testing of creations. But not only mammals, also birds. And now I'll show a video of a project from where they're from. So in this project, they involve parrots, and here the parrot is playing a game, but there's also research where they develop technology where parrots can call each other and interact. So how do we make different types of interfaces for non-humans, for animals, for birds? Then another way to do it that I already mentioned before is representative profiles, or for example, it's a persona, if any or some of you have used in your work, where we make a representative profile of usually a human, describe them, what their needs are, how they work, so we can make human profiles, but we can also have non-human profiles. And this is from one project from Australia. And for example, this is the Beans the possum. And this profile was primarily created through secondary research, so reading about this species in encyclopedia and understanding kind of what their needs are, etc. But they can also be created, for example, involving researchers from a particular field, like a biologist, urban ecologist, in general ecologist, to develop kind of representations of these things that then we can bring to the table with other humans, or even just with us as designers, that this is something that we should consider in our work. And they can be made for a particular species, but they can also be made for ecosystems, and they're called ecosystems. And here, for example, is one about the Amazon rainforest. And again, it includes kind of vital information that we should know about the stakeholder when we design with it. And also the perennial stream is another example of this. Then another object or approach that I have seen is that you have humans act as proxies to advocate for nature. And one approach is that, for example, you prepare the representative profiles, and then you ask the human participants, regardless of their educational background or expertise, that based on the profile that they are given, that throughout the engagement workshop or whatever session, that they adopt the role of that entity, and they try to speak on behalf of that natural stakeholder. And in this way, it's not necessarily that they provide the perfect or the most clear and unbiased representation of that natural stakeholders' perspective, but the human gets to experience how it is to look at the project from a natural stakeholder's point of view that might be very different from theirs, and how it is to advocate for the needs of that stakeholder. It could also be done in projects, in design projects, where you invite researchers or people with a particular expertise related to that natural entity. Researchers, maybe indigenous peoples, also some certain professionals like fishermen or gardeners that have extensive practical experience engaging with certain stakeholders. And then these people are there to present the perspective of the natural stakeholder. Again, they're not going to present the unbiased, or they won't tell exactly the perspective of that stakeholder, but they will represent and advocate for that stakeholder in the discussion or the creation process. Another aspect is the creation of socio-ecological systems maps. This is one from my research, but in general, the activity of mapping a setting or a context, not only from who is there from humans, what governs or what policies govern this place, what technology is there, or what infrastructure is there, but also what natural stakeholders are there, how things flow, where is what, how are these things interconnected. And then also an example from a summer school by Eeva Laube and Ruuta Jumita from Latvia, where they, this is a socio-ecological systems map of an urban market where at the first glance, there seems to be not a lot of ecological entities, but then once the students start mapping it, you can see that there's actually quite a lot of things and a lot of places where you could make interventions into these systems. And then the final, I think it's a second to last. So another one would be the visual and audiovisual productions to experience natures and modern human. This is from a MUST project here at the Helsinki University or in Finland, where they created this pavilion that includes speakers with sounds of nature, so that the decision makers who need to make decisions about the urban nature, they would do so in this space that also feeds them the kind of the audio experience of being in nature while they deliberate and make decisions about nature. And of course, that requires production and recordings, and in this case it's mostly audio, but also what would be the visual elements for it. And then another would be linked to I was about to say just graphic design, but it's not just graphic design. So in this case, it's from a architectural competition showing multi-species futures, but kind of that the graphics or visualizations of futures or visualizations of games or visualizations of movie sets or things like that, that they include the natural elements so that they are normalized in a sense that they are there. We need them there. We want to have, for example, a multi-species city, that we do not only focus on these kind of sleek concrete glass type of or very technologically produced spaces or representations of things. And then final way as the games, activities, and exhibitions for humans to learn about and connect to nature. Here is an example of a project by Kaylin Kao, Animal Diplomacy Bureau. It's a game that includes also these physical masks, but the rules of the games are written based on a study into behavior of urban birds. And then also the characters are developed based on that, so that when the people are playing the game, through the game, they learn about the different types of birds in this park. In this case, it's in London. What are the different types of birds? How do the birds interrelate? How do the birds with other birds, birds with the environment there, and kind of what are the rules of the game of the non-human world. And it can be played both with adults, but also with children. And then the final example, I'll show an example from Aalto University, from Julia Lohman and her initiative called Department of Seaweed, of how we can bring in and talk about ecosystems and the natural environments so that the humans can also experience and empathize with them. And I'll also kind of conclude with this video. So the Critical Tide was an exhibition at the Helsinki Design Museum. And Julia Lohman is an artist that works with seaweed, but at the same time, through her works, she wants to talk a lot about the ocean ecosystem and what are the requirements for it to exist. how humans engage with it. And she really brings kind of very beautiful practical installations, but then also works a lot with the researchers, and she exhibits in different spaces to challenge people's worldviews and let them experience this ecosystem that they might not experience directly in their lives. In some of the participants of the exhibition, you could also write notes to the ocean or to the Baltic Sea, confessing what sins you have committed towards the sea. You could engage with the seaweed, touch the material, and really touch the ocean plastics, and engage with that ecosystem that you wouldn't be able to engage with otherwise, while doing that in a very kind of engaging, interactive, hands-on manner. So with this example, then I conclude my talk. I hope that I was told I could take up 1 hour. I hope I didn't go too long, and that you still enjoyed the content of the lecture. And I would be very curious to hear your questions, but then also your reflections, ideas, perspectives of some of the questions that I asked you, but then also some of the reflections of how this relates to your work and kind of the project overall.
Hey, thank you, Emīlija. It was very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed the theory part a lot. It was really, really interesting, and also, of course, the examples were nice to see. I especially like the future example. Would be lovely to see something like that and experience society like that. So that was really like a hopeful picture as well. I have some questions in my mind, but let's take first from the audience some comments or questions. And Cindy, you can be the first one.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Cindy Gottila. I'm from the Umeå Institute of Design, and I was a colleague of Emīlija's. So I'm really super happy to listen to this presentation. Really very clear and laid out and like pedagogically extraordinary. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
It made me think also of probably something that you have addressed and will continue to address in your research life. Who are we engaging also in these? I don't mean who as in the stakeholders, the non-human stakeholders that you laid out so well, but also I feel like that there's all kinds of other human actors that so benefit from, I don't know, this new way of working, a new way of thinking. Are we in danger of having designers speaking to other designers?
In a sense, maybe yes, sometimes. But then at the same time, I feel like the most projects that I have seen, the work has included some other stakeholders, a lot of researchers. But then also the discussions, design is not the only field that is having the multi-species, more than human discussions. Also, I think sustainability scientists or different people working in that field are very keen and curious. I just saw one webinar today at the University of Helsinki where they're starting a project on multi-species justice and health. I'm not sure if there's designers involved there, but that work is happening. Urban planners are picking up this work, and the city of Helsinki last year published a report called Multi-Species City. And from their discussions with them, they're also very keen on having designerly perspectives from there. And I think that, of course, not everyone or even, for example, with urban planning, the discussions that I have had, there are people who are keen, and then there are people who are more resistant. I would be very curious to work, actually bring these approaches into a design agency and see how that plays out in practical projects where there is a client that wants a particular product or wants a service, and then seeing whether there is a space to have those discussions while there are budget limitations or time limitations, or yeah, the thing needs to make money at the end. So I would be very keen on seeing that, and I'm curious if there might be kind of more recent projects that have been doing that, and then I'm keen to see the publications of how that's going to happen. But I think also designers are proactive, but they're not the only ones who are proactive in this field.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from audience or comments? If not, we can take some comments from chat, maybe.
Or hey, I could also make one comment, and then I think it's actually a thing that I've been thinking, that what's the role of science, or what has it been, is that it's been taking away the special place of humans in the world. And I mean, like, my example of this is that in astronomy, you know, Galileo Galilei got us away from the heliocentric view of the world, and that was like a major thing taking place naturally. Then like the world is not rotating around us. so that was like actually we are on a far away place on a galaxy that's far from, you know, it's like we are so tiny. So in a way, the science is always taking us away from being special, you know. And I mean, like you know, you mentioned about the religions saying that the nature was made for us, and you know, that big dilemma. I think that's really big part of it, but it also made me think like that this process is, or it has been going on for centuries, and it will go on like sort of to finally show what is our place in the universe, in a way. Like it's smaller, so but I think like what Galileo made in like more kind of a hard sciences, it's that the sciences that we usually call kind of soft sciences, they aren't kind of because we haven't been put to our place yet in a way, or that, and then that really made me think about that thing, and I think that was somehow really eye-opening for me, that there's probably a long way to go to still find our real place in the world.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought. I hadn't thought about it from that kind of perspective of what is the role of science, but also it makes me think of kind of, we are still in part within discussions of whether the sustainability crisis is real, whether there are still people who question that and question the need that we do need to change or evolve, or because there's even kind of a, I've heard saying among the scientists that we know what we need to do, we're just not doing it. So in that sense, I think the soft sciences or religious beliefs, worldviews, they are essential for finding our real place in the world, but also seeing how do we change, how do we evolve, how do we work with the natural stakeholders if that is clashing with kind of our worldview and how we believe the world to be. So it challenges very many things, and maybe that's why kind of we are here where we are today.
Yeah. But I have one question before maybe looking at the chat, and that was about the natural stakeholders. I mean, you had that, but I was also thinking about like the inanimate parts of the natural stakeholders. So I mean, if we pump up oil from the ground, where does that oil, or let's say if we use sand for building something, where would that land in that category?
I think in my work I looked at kind of the life things, so I think I didn't include that, but I think for me it very much falls into the category of how do we value these things. And maybe I haven't really thought about the crude oil, but one of my colleagues at Aalto, she does her research about rocks and soils and their relation to the construction industry, because in many places there needs to be soil removed, and then in Finland there's also a lot of granite that needs to be blown up, and then this rock becomes either, I'm not sure if that part becomes like the pavements that we use or these rocks that we throw on the street in the winter. But then she is questioning, well, are like, how to say, are these rocks valuable in that they just exist there? Are we kind of, why do we just think that we can show up there and blow them up? And also with kind of non-Western perspectives on the world and sentience, that what if those rocks are kind of, they have particular type of sentience and they just live at a very different time scale, and then we show up because we need to put a new apartment block there, and then we feel entitled that we can move them in around. And I think my work has explicitly more focused on like the living parts, and now when I think about it, maybe because it's for me a bit easier to connect with that, because, well, it's life and it's living, or it's sustaining life, and how it moves. But I think it's an excellent question.
Yeah, and I mean, naturally, if it's about the process, the process is with any kind of a living entity, the process is a whole lot faster. But hey, thank you. You can probably see the chat box also by yourself, so if you want to.
Yeah, I think it's very related question there, actually. This from Gregory. I wanted to know what Emīlija thinks if we remove the human factor completely from a project.
Well, I think to completely remove human factor from a project, we would need to completely remove humans, including the designers, from the project. And one of the kind of thought explorations I had during my PhD was that, well, are we the only creative species that can create and design? Or if we, for example, create a landscape and then plants grow and modify it, is it change to our human design, or are they redesigning by themselves what we have designed for them? Or if we bring in a couch and a dog chews it up, is it damage to the couch or is it redesign? But I think it goes very much into kind of a philosophical discussion if there is no human present. But I think that within projects, I would be curious to see how much the designer that only designs for the non-human would need to do inner reflective work to detach themselves from being human. And even still then, I don't think that I as a human or anyone as a human would be able to fully adopt a kind of a non-human, non-anthropocentric perspectives. And there's quite long discussions in philosophy whether that is even possible, because we cannot see or experience this world from their perspectives, even if we can kind of imagine them or envision them, or we can base them on the research and observations that they do, but those still are funneled through us as human vehicles, or even in design we use this word needs a lot, but it is our concept, it's a human concept or even a designerly concept of what that means. So I'm not sure if we can ever fully remove the human from the more than human creative process, unless it's the entities doing that. And then I think we have whole nature building things for itself and creating things. Pigs bring in flowers into their homes to kind of to decorate, and animals play and relate to each other. Like there's so many things happening, but yeah, I don't think that we can remove the human fully.
Is there something else to conclude from the?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you, Emīlija, also going through the chat box. If
You can
something
yeah,
you could,
maybe
you might want to comment still, but I mean, we only have like 5 minutes to go.
Let's see. I think I will. Mila has been commenting a lot. I hope it's okay if I call you Mila by your first name. But I think there is research in Western perspectives about this, and you mentioned this Anna Tsing and her. I think one of her most famous books is the Mushroom at the End of the World, and the different entanglements of the mushroom industry and also ecosystems, etc. And then Emīlija, you also mentioned the pluriversal strategy, and I infer from that the non-Western perspectives, and I think they exist. I refrain from speaking on behalf of them. I don't think that it is my space. Maybe it could be a space for a researcher to come into one of the next sessions of this seminar, or in inquiring in general. I think those are important to consider and look into, but and also being aware of where do I or maybe any of you stand, or where do our beliefs and worldviews and cosmologies, our understanding of the world comes from, and how do we relate to that, and kind of unlearning for us the Western thinkers, or maybe some of the things that we might have lost from our cultures or worldviews. For example, I'm from Latvia, and a lot of the folklore tales, they still include a lot of this interconnections and interrelatedness, but throughout the centuries of Christianity and being colonized, that has been lost. So I'm curious if maybe Finland also has similar ideas. It's just something that in kind of our modern world, 21st century, or at least at the end of the 20th century, it wasn't the big topic, but maybe it's going to change for this century now.
Let's hope so. I think we are approaching to the end of the webinar. There is a lot of saying thank you. Many are saying thank you, and they were really liking your presentation. So also we, of course, we are really thankful that you came and prepared. So nice, really nicely thought over lecture for us, and all those examples as well. And yes, it was a really pleasure to once again listen to you. So thank you for this, and hopefully we can work together later as well.
Yeah, thank you, Emīlija, and we could stay in touch. I personally felt that it might be interesting. I don't know if we could maybe bother you once we are in that curriculum step with this project.
Yeah.
But naturally, I do understand that you would need to have some resources for that, for instance. But we will keep that in mind, and if we can find up some resources, we could contact you in the future.
Great. And thank you for the audience for listening, and then for the consortium for having me, but also for Kirsi and Tuomo for remembering or seeing some of my posts on the social media about research and then inviting me. It was a pleasure and also very great discussion afterwards. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have a nice spring.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.